Future-Proof in Zanzi, a podcast where we discuss how consumer behavior shapes our marketing plans. I'm Stacey, and I'm so happy to be back in studio with Senna for the last episode of 2025. We have an exciting topic lined up for today where we are talking about marketing in sports, which is such a massive opportunity for brands.
That's right, Stacey, especially in a sports-crazy country like South Africa. The initial plan for this episode was to talk about the Springboks because it seems like every brand wants to somehow be affiliated with them, and honestly, we can't hate because same. But this is such a big conversation that we felt it was worth discussing sports sponsorship in general, especially as we're seeing other national teams performing so well on the global stage.
And who better to talk about this than a brand that has been partnering with the Springboks for many years and recently started sponsoring the Proteas as well. I'm talking about leading low-cost airline FlySafair, and I'm really thrilled to welcome their Chief Marketing Officer today, Kirby Gordon, to the podcast. Welcome, Kirby.
Hi, ladies. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
But I need to go into Kirby's illustrious bio to show our listeners how incredible his trajectory has been. Kirby joined FlySafair in 2015 as Vice President of Marketing, a role that later expanded to include sales and distribution. He began his career in 2006 at Striker Entertainment, followed by the Jupiter Drawing Room. And after doing his MBA, he worked at Sanlam, and then he joined Kalahari.com in 2013 as head of brand, where he led above-the-line marketing and brand strategy, all experience that proved instrumental in shaping FlySafair's brand identity. Kirby is focused on sustainable growth and customer loyalty, and under his leadership, the airline has become a household name in South Africa. What a career! I feel like it was such a mouthful, but what a career, Kirby.
Oh, thank you. I'm blushing a bit now. I'm quite very kind of you. Also exhausting to think back on it.
Well, maybe to kick things off, do you want to tell us a little bit about your career journey and how you got to be the voice that we hear every time we fly FlySafair?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, I mean, look, it started in the early days in advertising. I think I was always drawn into the glamour of advertising as much as you don't want to admit it in the long run. And then when you actually get into the agency world, you realize that it's really quite hard work, and that, being on shoots and goodness knows what else is not nearly as glamorous as what you once dreamed it would be as a youngster. But it wasn't actually at all, horribly disappointing. It was a wonderful time. And I think we started working quite a bit on a number of campaigns, and, had some amazing opportunities to do some great stuff. But I think what always kind of irked me a little bit was the notion about not really seeing the performance there and finding it quite hard to measure. I think marketers are always great at kind of promoting ourselves in the campaigns that we do. But other than saying, gosh, people loved it, it's quite hard to really kind of get a full sense in some contexts of what exactly that success looks like. And so that really started driving me more into the world of e-commerce, which was sort of blooming at that point in South Africa, and really that ability to be able to reconcile so nicely what your activities were doing in an immediate sense onto sales. So effectively, what I always kind of say is that my career's followed a trajectory of selling stuff online. I don't know if I'm allowed to say rude words, but there's normally another word in that equation that comes along. And so, that was really where it started. So at Sanlam, we were looking at actually building online advice models. It was kind of in the very early days of those sorts of things. Kalahari was obviously a pure play kind of e-commerce environment. And then when the opportunity came up at FlySafair, it was interesting because it was actually an opportunity to enter into almost one of the oldest realms of e-commerce, in that we actually started, we always think e-commerce started with buying books, right? Thanks to Amazon. But we were actually buying air tickets either through a broker, a travel agent, or directly online, sort of even before then. And so that sort of brought with it a whole new challenge and a whole new interesting world, which little did I know would come with a lot of other fascinating elements to it as well. And yeah, that's really been the journey, for me over the last almost 11 years now at the airline, much longer than I ever thought it would be. But it's been a wonderful opportunity to build something new and such a privilege.
Such an interesting point about being online with the purchase of tickets long before shopping online was even a thing. So yeah, it's a really interesting point. And Kirby, why do you believe that sports sponsorship is such an effective marketing tool in South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, maybe part of sort of underlying that effectiveness is maybe to tell the story of how we arrived actually in the sports realm and with rugby specifically. So, they reached a point in our trajectory where we'd grown quite significantly, but we were often sort of pictured as though we were walking through this valley of kind of failed airlines. We were still the new kids on the block, even though the company was already 50 years old. And around us were scattered these brands of airlines that hadn't kind of made it before, and there were a couple of incumbents in the market who had been there for a long time. And at the time, in a lot of their messaging, they were going, oh, we've flown so many million customers and we've been around for this length of time. And they were really kind of pushing hard onto that kind of element of us being the new kids on the block. And we saw that. We actually physically saw that in our measurements. We look at our yielding quite closely in terms of what we can achieve for a ticket, and we realized that though our competitors were selling out before we were, and they were generally doing so at a slightly higher price point, and we just weren't able to get that. And there was something there that was missing. And what we distilled it down to was an element of credibility, actually. And so, our campaigns were always built in layers, and we had this sort of bread and butter work to get bums on seats. But there came this point where we said, well, we need some credibility. And we looked at, what were the options there. And the guys kind of, sort of said to me, well, let's think about a few different things. And of course, you can try to land a campaign, but that's quite hard just to espouse credibility. And so what really came to the fore as a great opportunity was I said, well, let me explore, this alignment to a sports sponsorship and to a national treasure more than a sports sponsorship, in its pure sense. And even though they weren't performing particularly well at the time, the Springboks kind of came to mind. And it was definitely a moment of like, go big or go home, because, it had to be like a national team. I was quite dead set on that. I went for gold. I was like, let's get one of the big ones. And I still remember pitching it to the CEO, and he said to me, his immediate response was, yeah, but will they have us? And because we were still so small at the time. And I mean, I'd already had the preliminary conversations before, obviously kind of trying to, plant any seeds internally. And they were prepared to have us, which was amazing. And so we did that. And obviously you sit and you wait for a while. And something that had been playing around in the background was that we'd been desperately trying to sign what's called these interline agreements, which is where you have partnerships with foreign carriers, so that you can kind of connect flights on from their flights to yours. And we were this little airline in the bottom of Africa, kind of knocking on doors and not really getting any answers. And we'd been struggling with it. And the first games that we played, the first games that our logo was actually on the field, was an inbound tour against France. There were 3 games against France. The first one was at Emirates Airline Park. And it was an amazing, obviously, moment for us to sort of see that logo painted on the field. But what was more amazing was when I got back into the office on that Monday morning, the first email that hit my inbox was from Air France saying, hi, let's have a conversation around that interline agreement. And that was when I was like, whoa. This is now something else, that's kind of landed it. And it certainly has created a step change for us. And I think that alignment is really for us in our journey. And it does different things, and it does different things for us now, and does different things for different people. But that in that moment for our journey was what sports sponsorship did.
Oh, that's so cool. So it created this level of credibility for you and really put you on the center stage. So very cool. Nice story. And now what led you to the point of bringing the Proteas on board as well?
Well, yeah, it was an interesting journey because, it started off with the rugby because of that credibility thing. And obviously there were so many wonderful spin-off effects on the tail end of it. And we sort of went through this moment where I was like, can I actually justify renewing the rugby? Because, what we'd originally sort of set out to achieve has maybe now been achieved, and we can maybe tick that list. And so you kind of do a reflection and you try to be really honest about it, because honestly, like, the ego part of you loves it. So you want to keep going, but is it the right thing by the business, And so we did an honest analysis of it, and we said, the reality is that even though it's fulfilled that mandate, it still does so much for us, for the business, in terms of brand uplift, recall, and actually, sales in a direct sense, that it makes sense to continue going. And then the cricket opportunity came around, and that was kind of quite a bizarre one, because no holds barred, and I speak about this with the cricket team all the time. Cricket South Africa was in a shaky place at one point a little while ago, and actually we'd had as an airline quite a bad experience with the then guard, and they'd been quite unreasonable. And I actually said, there's no ways I'll touch cricket in South Africa with a 10-foot barge pole. And so this sort of solicitation came out of the blue to say, would you like to sponsor cricket in South Africa? And I kind of laughed out loud and responded as politely as I could, saying, yeah, no, thanks, we're good. And obviously it wasn't the first time that they'd had that kind of response. So, hats off to the lady that was dealing with me, but she said, listen, so we've kind of had this response before about, Cricket South Africa, but like we're a whole new guard, and won't you just hear us out? Like, just give us a chance. And so we had the first meeting, and I met the team, and I realized who they were, and I heard their story about how they'd kind of come into the equation as a whole new leadership team that really recognized that there was an issue to face and something that they needed to take forward, and equally what their ambitions were, and how they were paying female players exactly what they were paying male players in terms of match fees, and how we could see the responses, we could see how the performance was improving, we could see how well the women's team was doing, along with the men's team. And so we looked at it, and we initially it was that kind of brand synergy that really made sense. And it's funny because the cricket story was almost a little bit of a reverse to the rugby story, because when it came to cricket, it was almost a little bit of us kind of paying it forward, because realistically, in order to bring other sponsors on board and to try and reinvigorate cricket in South Africa as an important thing, they almost needed, dare I say it, a little bit of our credibility.
Your credibility, yeah.
Put that forward. So and we wanted to make that investment. We believe in the guys, we believe in the sport, we believe in what cricket means to South Africans. It's a big audience within South Africa. It's a broad audience within South Africa. It was going at the right price, because they were trying to build it up at the time. And I mean, I think their successes just keep kind of speaking to that. And it was that allegiance and our view that we can really play a part in building this back up into something that is phenomenal. We walked that journey kind of unwittingly with the rugby guys, into what they were 2 World Cups later. I'm still like, it's absolutely mind-blowing to realize that was the case. But, we're confident in the cricket guys and seeing the same, and the dividends are there for us already.
Oh, that's really cool. And speaking of those dividends, and you mentioned 1 or 2 other metrics that you point to as ways of measuring the success of these partnerships. You spoke about brand uplift. You spoke about things like awareness. What are some of the ways that you measure the return on those investments in the partnerships?
No, look, I mean, it's sponsorships are always kind of quite tricky to quantify, and goodness knows we fall over backwards doing it as much as we possibly can, and so of course we look at all of those key metrics, and fundamentally for us, the one that we look at is, are there bums on those seats, and are they paying for those seats reasonably, because that's what really kind of keeps the business alive. But I think there's something else that comes into it that is really kind of worthy of speaking about as well, and that's sort of a lot of the stuff that we didn't anticipate at first. So, for example, what does it do to your employer brand? Do people want to work for the company that sponsors the Springboks and the Proteas? And that's quite significant. There's a lot that comes in there. What does it do for your staff, for your team, to be aligned with that? What pride do your people take forward in your brand? Now, this is quite intangible, but it does actually have a significant effect. We're a service industry. So, if people are feeling proud about the company that they work for and for what they need to do, then the reality is that they actually pick that up and push that forward to your customers. So that's the experience that they have as well. And then there's just that kind of level of the opportunities and the business opportunities that come to the fore. So, I mean, I spoke about the Air France, connection and what that meant for us, which was obviously significant. But, there are many others that have come forward, and it's sort of that credibility, that standing on the shoulders of giants thing that sort of comes into the fore as well. So there's so many sort of more not intangible benefits, but ones that are difficult to quantify, I suppose, that one really needs to bear cognizance of and try to take stock of, because those are there within the bigger remits of these kinds of sponsorship properties.
Yeah, it's the kind of conversation we have with our clients so frequently. It's like there are the brand metrics, the ones that are ultimately going to lead to greater demand for our brand, that are a little bit more difficult to quantify, but so important. And then there's the immediate return, like how, as you call it, bums on seats. So it is a tricky line to walk, and it is particularly so with sponsorships, because they are quite grey in terms of their impact to both. So yeah, it's really cool that you could push through it, through that sort of grey space in a world that is really very demanding of specific metrics that are contributing to that return. So Very
Look, I
cool.
think it's easier often when, when things are also going in the right direction. Those conversations are always more difficult when the business is heading in a different direction. Then you've got to kind of look at them, and it's quite a different conversation. So that's a different challenge that obviously marketers have to deal with. But because then I think, maybe some of that quantifiable stuff does become, so much more relevant and so much more kind of difficult and sticky, but it shouldn't be. It should always be seen in balance. And I think that's a challenge for us.
Kirby, every once in a while we get a guest and I can feel myself like just wanting to interrupt them and being like, you're right. Oh my goodness, you're brilliant. I'm really struggling to sort of tame my enthusiasm by the insights you're sharing today. And so from what you've described with how you got involved with sponsoring the national team, I also want to know, at the time it was such a bold thing to do, but now we are at the space where they are literally the gold standard of rugby. The whole world loves them. Their story as a team is so inspirational. But how do you ensure that the partnerships that you now go forth are like authentic rather than opportunistic as well? And do you see sort of other brands like trying to get in on the fun and action? And how do you make sure that your brand still stands out?
Yeah, look, it's an ongoing challenge, and certainly a big one within the Springbok arena at the moment. The property has just become so hot, and I think it stands to reason. We've seen the number of brands that have jumped on board with the Springboks of late, and they're starting to look more like Formula One drivers than they ever did before, with the logos all over the kit, which is wonderful. And it speaks to hopefully a continued success for the team. But it does create a challenge. I think you hit the nail on the head almost in the question there before, because it really is about authenticity. So I think, at the end of the day, you've got to really understand what it is that you seek to achieve from your alignment with the brand and with the sports property, and be really, really kind of honest about it. And if it's because, there's a senior individual in the business who's just rugby crazy and wants to make sure that he's got a box for every game and that it kind of serves an ego, well, maybe that's the right thing to do. I don't know. Let's not pass judgment on these things. But realistically, is that going to give you the kind of economic return that you need out of the thing because it's expensive? Well, then you've got to kind of think about what that means. So there is authenticity on that alignment that is absolutely so key. And I think that for us really came out in the Proteas sponsorship as well. So you've got to stand side by side. In terms of standing out, I think the reality is when you've got that authenticity and when you're really playing with it and what it means for you, it makes sense and it's quite easy. So if you're really kind of honest and almost sort of self-actualized in terms of why it is that you're involved in that particular property, you can expand and extend into your space and own your kind of nugget of area within that quite easily. And it's obviously about more than just a logo on the field or a logo on the perimeter boards or a logo on the shorts or whatever it is. It's really about, finding your opportunity to involve yourself in being what it is. And for us, a big part of it is, we as an airline are South African. We move around South Africa. We connect South Africans. Our positioning is we connect South Africans with who and what they love. One of the things they love is sports. And so, for us, it's that nationalistic element. It's about being South African and about moments where South Africans come together, traversing creed, color, whatever it is that we do need to traverse to get behind and all yell for the Bokke in one given moment or for the Proteas in one given moment. And that's, that's our authentic moment in this equation. That's the golden thread for us. And for us, if we can just keep working on that, I do believe we will stand out.
Such a beautiful brand link, hey?
I just almost want to say that. Can you say that louder for the people at the back? That is so important. And it's the message that we consistently sort of emphasize to brands, right? Is what is your story? What do you stand for? What are your values? Because that's going to inform how you show up and where you choose to show up. And if that is inauthentic, we have such astute consumers that are going to be able to spot that right off the bat. And I think that's leading to my next question of the storytelling, right? The essence of the storytelling. What do you think makes a sports-related campaign like truly memorable? In light of the fact that I have not seen quite a powerful tool for nation building as like sports in this country. We know the history, we know what it means to people. So what's the key to getting that right in terms of a campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is just an extension of our previous conversation. It really is about that authentic moment. I think it really is about finding that, and you're right as well in that it's not just about you as a brand kind of connecting. I think it's also those moments that the sport and or the property means as well. So rugby does in South African history have such an, especially like a World Cup moment, has such a massive kind of significance to us for those of us that were that were around and that can remember it. I mean, that 95 World Cup, Nelson Mandela coming out. I mean, the significance for us as a country of that moment, rugby is just gifted as a property with that particular element, and I think it's so important. But every sport and every property has got its own thing, and I mean, one of the campaigns that I always think back on that really just kind of impacts me is it was the London 2012 Olympics when Procter and Gamble put together that amazing commercial. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was the Thank You Mom commercial, and it was just this incredibly moving, incredibly authentic commercial where you're dealing with the Olympics as a property, you're dealing with everything that the Olympics stands for. I mean, I think every Olympic athlete, it seems to be like a weird unwritten thing that they have the rings kind of tattooed on them because it's just such a moment and such a zenith in these people's lives that they get to when you're an athlete of that thing. It's a very different kind of story. It's a very different kind of authenticity to tap into. But Procter and Gamble did that so beautifully in that campaign when they kind of acknowledged that there were people behind the people that were in the swimming pools or on the courts or on the tracks or whatever it was. And they did this beautifully authentic commercial where they spoke to that, and they spoke to that striving, and they spoke to the hard work that went into it from a kind of, dare I say, a team perspective, but the team as in the family and specifically the moms. And in the commercial, if you look at it cleverly, there's the mom waking up in the early morning and she's waking the kid up to go to practice, but she's also putting on the washing. And then, there's another mom from another country waking up a different kid doing a different sport and, doing the dishes on the side while they're getting ready or while they're talking about whatever went on. And it's this really authentic positioning of Procter and Gamble also kind of having been there with their products through the journey, which didn't feel out of place, which I think is such a massive thing for an FMCG brand to land, to not feel out of place, to feel authentic, but to really tap into like, what is the Olympics about? Like, it's about national pride and stuff, but it's also, I think in so much of that narrative, it's about those individual adversity stories. And it's just that for me, that was just such a beautiful example of how to really take it forward.
It was such a beautiful way of integrating both the product and the people in it. And I think it's a really cool example.
I think it's a gold standard. I think the only word I can really use to describe it is it's like strategically elegant. It was just so well considered and so well executed. Flawless.
I mean, you also referenced the Francois Pienaar Nelson Mandela moment, and maybe this is just a humble flex, but Stacey and I got to meet Francois Pienaar about 2 weeks ago in Munich. And I think we come from two different generations, but I think that moment transcends history, and I think it speaks to just the importance of sports. But what do you think are some of the common mistakes then that brands make when they are trying to leverage sports partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, look, cool. That's amazing. Well, how awesome to have met him. And I think it really is a national hero. It's like, he's like one of those individuals that's out there it's just phenomenal. Common mistakes, cheapers. I mean, there are so many pitfalls, right? I mean, I think the one that bears, repeating just once again is losing that kind of authentic link. So, that's, I mean, we don't need to belabor the point, but I mean, that's really, really key. I think the other issue that a lot of brands tend to do is just pop their logo on the field and walk away. Like that's not really necessarily a strategic kind of significance. So you've got to take that opportunity and take what it means, and I think extend it into the market broader and possibly into other markets. I think another mistake, I alluded to it earlier, is making a massive investment of this space, and power to you if you're in an economic position to do it, but like for the wrong reasons. Like if you're looking at a sponsor on the field and going like, why are they there? I'll tell you why they're there. The CEO loves the sport, and so it doesn't really deliver against their audience or against their space. So that's silly in my mind. It's buy the tickets, So that can kind of be a difficult thing. And then I think the other thing that's really, and I must admit, I've not seen a lot of this, thankfully, in the properties that we've been involved in. But certainly, in my career over the years, I think one of the other things that's problematic is actually seeing your co-sponsors on the property as adversaries. I mean, obviously the reality is that you're not competing industries. So that is, always what happens within the property. So if I'm going to stand on the Springbok field and I'm going to see Coca-Cola as my adversary fighting for my share of voice, we're losing. We're both losing. I mean, the equation is that if you actually work together where you can and where it's natural and authentic to do so, where your messaging and your requirements overlap, you actually make a lot more kind of sense out of what you're doing, and you can really extend your message further. So I think where brands don't work together, both on a business level and also on a kind of brand level, when you're co-sponsoring an event, that's a mistake. And for example, we are so excited. One of the brands that stepped up onto the Proteas just after us was Suzuki, and we've got a great relationship with Suzuki. We always have as kind of co-brand partners. We've done a lot of cool work together in the past. So when we learned that they were coming to be part of the Protea family, we were like, score! This is amazing, and we're just going to do so much cool stuff together under the Protea banner, and it just means more for both of us, and it means more for the property, and it just makes sense. So for me, ignoring your co-sponsors, or worse, kind of working against them, that's a huge mistake.
Something that you mentioned earlier is kind of stands out for me, because I know it's something that is so important to look and appear authentic, if that is truly your message, is to find a way to integrate that sponsorship across all your different channels in a way that makes sense for all those different channels. And you said earlier, you can't just pop a logo on the field and then walk away from it. So what does that look like for FlySafair with the partnerships that you have with the brands that we're speaking about today?
Yeah, I mean, that is a significant thing. So, I think if you focus so much on the audience for that brand, even though that may be your key audience, and that's fine. I mean, that's probably a good fit, right? So make sure that you're there and that you're conscious. But I mean, I remember when we, one of the things that happened when we first signed up with the rugby was that, and I'm not going to name and shame, but a specific publication within the country that sort of focuses on the sport arrived and knocked on my door, and they were like, right, here we go. We prepared this package, and it's, here's a year's worth of package, and you can get a full page advert in our magazine, and we'll be on our website, and you can sponsor this section of our website. And I know it's going to cost you, I think it was like 2 million rand at the time for the year or whatever. And you can just sign here. And I was like, yeah, no thanks. And they were like, what do you mean no thanks? You're a rugby sponsor. Like, this is where you need to be. And I was like, no, it's kind of not, because at the time, our strategy was around that kind of gravitas. It was about that credibility. And so, what we'd said was, people that watch rugby fans are going to know we sponsor rugby. I mean, they watch the games. They're going to see the logo on the field. It's pretty hard to avoid, In hindsight, afterwards, they're going to see the flyovers that we do. That's always going to be there. I wanted the like mom who doesn't watch rugby, who's dropping off the kids at school in the morning, because she's also a really important customer to me. In fact, but maybe even more so, I wanted her to go, oh, I'm not a rugby fan, but geez, okay, they're sponsoring the Springboks. Well, that's quite something. I guess that's, that means something, because I understand what that means. Even though I'm not a fan, I don't have that kind of connected allegiance to it. So I think it's understanding what the property can do for you across all of your thresholds, and work on that. And, the reality is, like, I mean, I once cycled the Argus, and it was challenging because, we trained that year, and I did it once. I only got to do it once, but there were definitely like a cohort of guys that got onto a bicycle once a year and rode the Argus. Like, you would be pedaling past them up the hills, and then the downhills were always frightening, because generally they were quite a lot heavier, and they're kind of like bombing past you from behind, and I would just like freak out as it happened, And I think the point is that you've got to be kind of cautious about being the brand that just bombs past in the kind of obvious space, and not looking at what your broader audience is and where you can really take advantage of all elements of what's going on, because the reality is, national pride, which is really what it stands for, national pride, is across the nation, right? So, there are people who, like those guys that ride the Argus once a year, only watch the World Cup final. And that's cool. That's amazing. And that's what makes the sport so spectacular, is that everyone will get behind it. But, if we can appeal to them outside of that World Cup final moment, and because they know what it means, I think then your property becomes that much more valuable to you.
Yeah, that's really incredible. It's almost like you take a step outside of the sponsorship and take a look at what it represents, which is, as we keep saying here, national pride, and then joining up those different channels that don't necessarily only speak to people who watch sport, but are channels across the country, all of which contribute to this idea of national pride. So yeah, it's a pretty cool one. It was pretty cool. Actually, when you said that story about how the publication approached you and said, let's put the ad in, whatever, I was like, I wonder where this is going to go, because that is a big thing to turn down, right? So and you turned it down because you were doing exactly what you said around creating authentic content and not just picking the best thing that looks good for that moment.
Plus, we were poor. We'd spent all our money on the sponsorship.
On the Springboks. Exactly. What's 2 million rand between friends, though? The other thing that we talk a lot about with brands when we speak to them is about speed. In our kind of current environment, everything has to happen so quickly. The new topic lands, the new idea lands, and it's like, how quickly are we able to respond to that with the right kind of communication? For you guys at FlySafair, and I don't only refer here to your sponsorships, but I guess your communication in general, how able are you to plan things in advance, and how agile are you in the moment to create content that meets that moment?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for us as an airline, that reactivity and that kind of nimbleness is absolutely key. But it's true across e-commerce in my experience for the most part. I mean, that's really where you can jump in and take those phenomenal opportunities. So, I mean, it stands to reason there's always the stuff that you've got to plan, right? So you've got to have that calendar full. Our business is unique in that the candy bar doesn't sit on the shelf waiting for a year to be purchased. It's like every day that flight, right now as we're sitting here in airplanes departing, and there's empty seats on it that we just can't sell later, like they're gone, So we've got to keep feeding that funnel, and that does require a good amount of planning and preparation, but certainly a lot of strength in terms of what we're able to do from a brand perspective, and specifically, as you say, in the context of these sponsorships and taking full advantage of them, is that ability to be quick and to be nimble. And it's also some of the best fun we've had, is in doing that, because it really helps you to kind of derive and maintain that authenticity. So, if we can run sales off of the back of rugby scores or, whatever it is that we're kind of running for at that given point, it just helps kind of really ground ourselves in the involvement in what is coming. And it's not just like a generic message around, yay, box, you know what I mean? It's like, shit, they scored, there you go, I used a bad word. I've been really holding back.
But you did so well. It was only like minute 33. Good job.
Too impatient. But, it's like, well, they scored this or whatever that was achievement. And we can really involve in that if you have that ability to be nimble. And, I think we as marketers, often we're so cautious. I've worked in financial services. I know what the like T's and C's are that are inherent to everything that goes on there. I know how hard it is sometimes to push that boulder uphill. But, I think if you keep fighting the good fight within the remits of what needs to be done and making sure that you're thinking logically and that you're working with like your compliance teams and you're understanding what you can do to at least, if not react, perfectly in a moment, to at least have like, here are my 3 scenarios and I can go one of these 3 ways and I know that all of them are approved and I can just use the one that's most relevant. It's sometimes expensive planning, but it is planning that you can do. And I think it really means a lot.
That's a really interesting one. I actually haven't heard that before. The upfront investment in 3 different scenarios and then you pick the one that's relevant for the moment. That's a new one for me to hear. So very cool. Thanks for sharing.
A little trick.
A little trick. Kirby, I wanted to ask you about, we mentioned in your bio that you're very passionate about sustainable growth. And here in sports partnership, at least in this realm, sports, especially in South Africa, evokes such a deep emotional connection and the sense of national pride. But how do you tap into that responsibly? And how do you sort of then try and predict where the knockoffs for that national pride can then become maybe nationalistic, or any sort of other things, unforeseen things that you do when you're building the brand?
Yeah, so again, I think it's rooted in if you're doing something for the right reason and you're doing the right thing, it's kind of quite hard to go wrong. So, it's again about sticking to that kind of authentic basis. So much of what goes on in sports and in the properties across the board is around some of the development stuff that's happening behind the scenes. I think we've always done ourselves a disservice to be critical about it in that we don't often speak about that enough. There's a part of our company culture, which I really respect, although I see the foregone opportunity is that we do a lot of good, but we don't do it so that we can talk about it. We do it because we believe it's the right thing to do. And, so when you have those opportunities to be involved in those kinds of activities, it's really meaningful. And I think at the end of the day, whether or not you're talking about it, the authenticity of that involvement and that kind of activity, does shine through. And I think it does become part of what you do and who you are. And if your people and your staff, most importantly, understand what it is that you're up to and how it is that you're involved in something, the world will know. The world will definitely know. They'll see it in your service. They'll see it in your experience, and they will know.
As a consumer that really believes that businesses should do good, I kind of have beef with you for a little, for that more silent approach, right? I have beef with you because in this interview, you mentioned how even Cricket South Africa's sort of gender parity stance is something that really resonated with you, and then you absolutely supporting them. I feel as though as a consumer, I mean, we've done research and we know that consumers are increasingly expecting brands to take a stand on societal issues. It is becoming an expectation. And I think as a consumer of your brand, I want to be taken on that journey. And so definitely some opportunity for you to reflect there, because I think that we should know about the stuff. It's so important to take a stand. And I think your brand is doing that in the best way. And why not bring us along on that journey? So provocation for you there.
No, you did right. You did right, and it is definitely a consideration. And there is some stuff that we get involved in that is direct, that is kind of on the forefront, and certainly tactical opportunities along the way. There are other things, and I think what's opened up, about this particular approach. There's some things that we're aligned to that are really meaningful causes that are kind of quite hard to talk about and to support. And we've got the freedom to support those things now without necessarily having to put them front and center to our identity. And I know that sounds weird and conservative, but I don't, it's kind of like adopting the ugliest puppy at the SPCA. You don't want to put them on the billboard. Bless socks is the reality. But, someone's got to take him home. So,
and I think that's so valid. I think a lot of marketers who know that their brands do a lot of good sort of may face some similar concerns with how do we advocate for this issue without censoring it in a way that's overwhelming. But I also I touched on the Cricket South Africa example that you just made, but I'm keen to hear from you as someone who does do a lot of good with a brand that does a lot of good. Where have you observed FlySafair's sponsorship sort of creating that real cultural and community impact, something that you maybe haven't discussed already?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's across the board. I mean, we've got such a wonderful opportunity to take observation of the country, because we really do, as a kind of company and as a service, have quite a deep interaction and sort of cross-sectionality with South Africans, coming from all different places. And there's so many interesting observations that you pull about South Africans and our various cities and the way that we are across the board. And it's so much fun. And I think there's opportunity to talk to that so much. So, we really enjoy that, obviously, around moments like Heritage Day, where you can really kind of talk to your South Africanness, and even just the holidays coming up now, you sort of see, all the inlanders heading to the ocean, and the great kind of trek from the Cape back to the Eastern Cape, and it's so December, and it's just there's so many opportunities to come through and pull through, and sports also kind of unites us in that meaningful way. The way that we celebrate sports, the little traditions and the little things that you learn, and the little you even hit it there, the little words that we use along the way, and they're sort of, they live in their own spaces culturally, and they have their own relevance. But at the end of the day, it all plays toward, supporting the same thing, which is what's so cool about it. And I think that's really where the kind of cultural togetherness comes into play, and where we can all kind of stand side by side and, shout at the ref.
Okay, but there's got to be some beef. There's got to be some tea behind the scenes when you're managing these big sports sponsorships, stuff that we don't know about. Are there any of those that you're able to share? Some of these realities that we don't see playing out?
I mean, yeah, obviously they always are. I mean, I think you've got to be kind of careful about managing things that happen behind the scenes. I mean, I think as with anything really, what it normally comes down to is if there is any kind of struggle. And I've got to be honest, we're we've actually got great relationships. I mean, we've not really struggled with our guys at all, and I'm not just saying that to save face. I mean, I would spill the tea in this scenario. I've already sworn once, so we can keep going. But but the reality is, it normally comes down to miscommunication. So if you're expecting something to be there or something to happen and it doesn't happen for whatever reason, then you kind of come into that environment. The rugby journey has been an interesting journey along the way because we kind of became part of the old guard, and then there were like so many new guys coming in, and obviously there's you understand the nature of the business, and there's a need to kind of impress the new chaps as they come in, and you're like, hey, don't forget about the one that's been here all along. And they go, okay, yeah, you're right, okay, sorry, and we'll make sure you get like an A-list player at your next event, or whatever the kind of case is. So you've just got to manage it, you've got to work it, and you've got to maintain that kind of closeness, and I think you can get around a lot of that.
And I guess just to kind of start closing us off, there's obviously things that you see happening in the industry that the rest of us might not be as aware of. So what are some of those trends that you see are shaping sponsorship of sports specifically in our country? So, I mean, dare I say AI, but things, any tech stuff, data, fan engagement, anything that's kind of shaping the future of the way we sponsor sports here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a few things that are sort of shaping the future and the trajectory of the way it's going. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with things like AI and various different kinds of involvements. I think there's a lot happening on the field that is kind of advancing. I think there's some interesting spaces that are happening kind of parallel to what's on the field online. A lot of natural kind of almost sort of citizen journalist stuff that's coming out. I think that content is becoming more and more relevant. I think what TikTok did in sport, well, across the world is something to really sort of sit up and take note of, because it really changed the way things are happening. And I think we're getting exposure in a beautiful sense for, such a smorgasbord of fans, which is just, sensational. So I think there's a lot that's happening in that space. And I think, a lot of the property owners are also waking up to that, and they're sort of starting to say, okay, we recognize that it's important for us to build a database of fans, an actual like email database, like good old fashioned email database, or a kind of an entity, a vector database of kind of knowledge, maybe in an AI world where we're talking and walking and understanding certain things about different people and how to sort of profile and engage with them, so that we can actually then serve those elements of value back to the brands that are sponsoring us. Because as the brands change and their businesses change, it's different, so I mean, if we talk about a really radical example, I mean, let's imagine that in a world where data protection is a whole different entity. Let's say you're an e-commerce phenomenon and you want to start, reactively remarketing to rugby fans. If as part of your sponsorship, there's a feed or an entity of knowledge that Saru are selling to you as a unit of value into your business, to say here's remarketing statistics on rugby fans, remarket Springbok gear to them if that's what you're selling or whatever's relevant. That's a whole kind of that's a brand asset or an asset of the Springboks that never existed before. And so I think that's the kind of thinking that's starting to emerge, especially in a digital and in a social age. And I think, gone are the days of where the asset was just, the logo on the field or the logo on the shorts. One of our co-sponsors who I really just think is so interesting, and they've been there, I think longer than us on the rugby side, is a company called Freddie Hirsch. And you may have seen Freddie Hirsch's logo on the side of the field. Freddie Hirsch produces like herbs and spices and seasonings for meats. And for them, the brand Freddie Hirsch means a lot, but, consumers might not necessarily know what it is because they know the sub-brands that they produce of different things, the different braai salts. And they've been able to use their sponsorship value and their linkage to the Springbok to actually create products more than to promote the brand. And it's just a different use of the assets and of the relationship, but no less meaningful than us or First National Bank or Pick and Pay or Land Rover in a different context, or Red Bull even. I think it's just a different way to utilize the assets and to make them work for you.
Kirby, this has been such a refreshing and candid and insightful interview. At each of your answers, I just wanted to yell, clock it. But we have come to the end of our chat today. But before you go, I am so... Oh, you even... To the listeners, he did the gesture, the clock it gesture. Anyway, before we we go. I wanted to ask you something that I like to ask guests just to get a general interest in a glimpse in what interests you. I am dying to know that if you could sponsor any other team, sport, or league, no matter how obscure, whether basketball, whether like something like polo or something random, like if you had it your way, what would you go? What would you go for?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Wow. Huh. So to keep it within the sports realm, look, I think the one thing that I would love in our space is like a broad appeal participative activity. Like I think that's
cool.
something that would be really, really cool. So I have to look to my old alma mater, Sanlam, something like the Cape Town Sanlam Marathon. I think we can talk about it again. I think it's fine, but I think an achievement like a sports property like that, where it's not just about the superstars that are at the front of the forum, but actually being able to take part yourself, presuming you can run a half marathon, which I'm not sure I can, but if you could, that I think is a cool rounding to what we have. So if I could go for like any sports property above what we've got, that would be what I would want to kind of conclude that bouquet with.
Oh, I love that answer. Can I also
That's
please put forward women's athletics? I'd also like to see that one sponsored.
Of course.
So now that we're just submitting our requests.
But the paddle guys, please don't hear this and then start like inboxing Kirby.
Kirby, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really, really enjoyable and pretty insightful conversation. So thank you for being in studio with us today. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. Please subscribe on our channels, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Till next time.